The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Senate sparkled with its usual excess of crystalline chandeliers and holographic displays, the kind of gaudy decor that screamed, "We have too much money and no taste." Representative Zelix 427 of the Proxima Coalition stood at the central podium, their 8 tentacles gesticulating wildly in what their species considered the height of diplomatic discourse. To everyone else, it looked like an octopus having a seizure. Distinguished colleagues, Zelix 427 warbled through their speech enhancement module, which somehow managed to make their voice even more grating. "We face an unprecedented threat to galactic stability." The assembly of 247 different species collectively leaned forward in their anti-gravity seats, except for the gravitons who, as usual, had to lean backward because they experienced gravity in reverse. The threat in question, humans. Yes, those bipedal organisms from the backwater spiral arm of the galaxy, who still thought faster than light travel was cutting-edge technology. The same species that had only unified their planet after discovering that coffee could be synthesized in space. These primitives, Zelix 427 continued, displaying a hologram of Earth that was embarrassingly outdated. It still showed Pluto as a planet, have begun expanding beyond their solar system without filing the proper P13X forms for interstellar development. Several gasps echoed through the chamber. The bureaucratians particularly looked like they might faint. High Chancellor Vexnor of the Centaurian Empire, whose species evolved from what could only be described as space peacocks, ruffled his iridescent feathers in distress. Without proper documentation? This is worse than the great paperclip shortage of cycle 847. The chamber erupted into chaos. The logicians started calculating probability matrices, the emotionals began weeping dramatically, and the warrior caste representatives polished their ceremonial badges that hadn't seen actual combat in 12 generations. "Order, order in the Senate," bellowed Administrator Blorp, a gelatinous mass of bureaucratic efficiency who had literally evolved to process paperwork. "We must follow proper procedures for galactic panic." A junior representative from the Rational Systems Alliance raised an appendage. "Has anyone actually tried talking to these humans?" The silence that followed was so profound that you could hear a quantum particle drop. "Talk to primitives?" Zelix 427 managed to look offended, with a face that consisted primarily of sensory nodes. "They still use physical currency, and their primary global information network is filled with pictures of small furry creatures they call cats." Chancellor Vexnor stood, his plumage creating a dazzling light show that accidentally triggered the emergency evacuation protocols in 3 sectors. "I propose we follow Galactic Protocol 7B4, Declaration of War against emerging civilizations who don't follow proper filing procedures." The vote was unanimous except for the contrarians who voted against it on principle, and the sleepers who hadn't been awake for the last 3 centuries. War was declared on humanity with all the pomp and circumstance of a bureaucracy that had spent the last millennium perfecting the art of filing things in triplicate. As the declaration was being processed through the required 17 departments for approval, stamping, and proper color coding, not a single being in the Senate wondered why humans had survived on a death world that would make most species cry for their spawning pools. Not one asked why a species that spent most of its history fighting itself might be good at warfare. And absolutely nobody questioned why the last 3 civilizations that tried to invade Earth had mysteriously gone silent. The Senate had made its decision, the paperwork was filed, the war would proceed according to regulations. Poor bastards never stood a chance. The first battle fleet arrived at Earth's orbit with all the subtlety of a disco party in a library. Their ships, polished to regulation brilliance, reflected sunlight so intensely that humans initially thought they were being invaded by giant space mirrors. Admiral Crix-9, commander of the Galactic Enforcement Fleet, had expected the primitives to surrender at the mere sight of such magnificent vessels. Instead, the humans sent back a message that made several of the fleet's translation specialists quit their jobs. "Nice ships. Would be a shame if something happened to them." The Admiral dismissed this as primitive attempt at communication. "Launch the standard invasion protocol," he commanded, thoroughly pleased with himself for remembering to file the pre-invasion notification form K7 in triplicate. That's when things started going wrong, terribly, hilariously wrong. First, the humans didn't follow any of the standard defense protocols. The Galactic Military Manual clearly stated that primitive species should attempt to engage in ship-to-ship combat, failing spectacularly due to their inferior technology. Instead, these lunatics were using their own satellites as kinetic weapons, turning their space junk into a deadly orbital minefield. "They're weaponizing their garbage," screamed Lieutenant Pierce, watching as a defunct weather satellite punched through their flagship's shields. "That's not in the manual." But that was just the beginning. While the Galactic Fleet struggled with Earth's improvised orbital defense system, human hackers were having a field day with the aliens' standardized operating systems. Apparently, no one in the galaxy had ever considered that admin 12345 might not be the most secure password for warship command systems. The second invasion attempt went even worse. The warrior caste, thoroughly embarrassed by the fleet's failure, sent their most elite shock troops. They landed in something called Australia, confident that no primitive life forms could survive in such a hostile environment. 3 days later, the survivors were begging to be evacuated, babbling incoherently about drop bears and something called a platypus that defied all logical classification. "How do they live there?" sobbed Commander Yick, still picking poisonous spines out of his ceremonial armor. "Everything on that continent is evolved to kill." The third attempt targeted human military bases directly. The galactic forces, armed with plasma weapons and energy shields, expected an easy victory over primitive projectile weapons. They hadn't counted on the humans' extensive collection of what they called old stuff that still works. Tank battalions from multiple Earth nations rolled out vehicles that, by galactic standards, should have been in museums. The aliens' sophisticated targeting systems, programmed to lock onto energy signatures, were baffled by the purely mechanical war machines. "Their weapons aren't even smart," protested General Zax, 456 during the emergency Senate session. "They're just explosively propelling bits of metal. How are we supposed to defend against that?" The fourth attempt focused on electronic warfare. The technocrats deployed their most advanced AI systems to disable Earth's primitive digital infrastructure. They didn't expect the humans to counter with something called cat videos that crashed their neural networks through sheer illogical cuteness. Back in the Senate, panic was setting in. The bureaucrats were stress-filing paperwork. The logicians were having existential crises, and the warrior caste representatives had stopped polishing their badges long enough to actually look worried. "They don't make any sense." High Chancellor Vexnor's plumage had lost its luster, now a dull grey of distress. "Their military doctrine is completely chaotic. They're using centuries-old technology alongside bleeding-edge innovations. They have no standardization." "It gets worse," moaned Administrator Blorp, their gelatinous form quivering with anxiety. "They've begun expanding into our territory, and they're not even filling out the territorial acquisition forms properly. They're just taking things." The final straw came when humans discovered the galactic communication networks. Within days, something called memes began spreading through alien social media. Military discipline crumbled as alien troops couldn't stop responding nice to every message containing the number 69, a numeric sequence that held some mysterious human significance. In the command center of the 5th Invasion Force, Admiral Krex watched in horror as humans deployed something they called psychological warfare. They were broadcasting human action movies to the alien troops. Fast and Furious had the logicians in therapy, trying to understand how such physics-defying stunts were possible. Pacific Rim had the warrior caste questioning their entire giant robot-based military doctrine. "Sir," reported a shell-shocked communication officer, "the humans have begun transmitting something called dad jokes on all frequencies. Morale is dropping faster than our shield efficiency." The Senate was in session again, but this time the magnificent hall was filled with the sound of panicked murmuring and the rustling of emergency evacuation forms. The humans weren't just winning, they were rewriting the rules of warfare while simultaneously ignoring all of them. "They have weapons that can crack planets," shouted one representative. "No," corrected another, even more terrified. "They have weapons that could crack planets, but they're choosing not to use them. They're beating us with their obsolete technology because they think it's funny." The truth was finally sinking in. They hadn't declared war on a primitive species. They'd declared war on a species that had turned survival into an art form, chaos into a strategy, and warfare into a science that defied all logical understanding. and the humans were just getting started. The Galactic Senate's emergency session was interrupted by the sound of human music blasting through the supposedly secure communication systems. The song was something about a rickroll. Nobody quite understood its significance, but it was driving the audiolings to the brink of madness. Would somebody please shut that off? High Chancellor Vexnor's feathers were molting from stress, leaving a trail of iridescent fluff across the Senate floor. We have more pressing matters to discuss, like how the humans have turned our own bureaucracy against us. The humans, it seemed, had discovered the galaxy's greatest weakness: paperwork. They'd begun filing so many forms, permits, and applications that the entire bureaucratic system was approaching critical mass. The bureaucratians were working triple shifts just to keep up with the backlog. They've submitted 17,000 applications for parking permits in restricted space sectors. Administrator Blorp's gelatinous form was practically vibrating with anxiety. And each one is filled out slightly wrong in a different way. We're legally required to process and respond to each error individually. But that was just the administrative front. On the battlefield, things were even more chaotic. The humans had reversed-engineered alien technology with terrifying speed and even more terrifying creativity. They weren't just using it, they were improving it in ways that made absolutely no sense. Take the Battle of Proxima Station. The humans had modified their primitive projectile weapons with alien gravity tech. The result? Railguns that fired bullets that changed gravity mid-flight. The galactic forces found their ships being pulled in 12 different directions simultaneously, while human vessels, held together with what appeared to be space duct tape and optimism, zipped through the chaos unscathed. "They've weaponized our safety protocols," screamed Admiral Zex-8 during the battle. "Their ships are broadcasting 3,000 emergency distress signals simultaneously. Our automated rescue systems are trying to save everyone at once, and by the void is that ship held together with actual tape." In the Centauri sector, human forces had discovered that the aliens' sophisticated AI-driven defense systems could be overwhelmed by simply showing them videos of Earth cats knocking objects off tables. The AI would get stuck in loops trying to understand why the cats did this, leaving their ships defenseless. The Battle of Orion's Belt was particularly embarrassing for the galactic forces. Humans had somehow converted their entire fleet's communication systems to exclusively use what they called meme formats. The alien intelligence officers trying to intercept their transmissions were having nervous breakdowns trying to understand why "one does not simply walk into Mordor" was a valid military command. "Sir," reported a communications officer, their tentacles tied in knots of confusion, "the humans are coordinating complex battle maneuvers using something called SpongeBob reference formats. Our tactical AI is having an existential crisis." Back in the Senate, representatives were watching in horror as humans expanded into alien territory, using the most insidious weapon of all, tourism. Human backpackers were showing up on alien worlds, taking selfies with local monuments and somehow establishing beachheads before anyone realized what was happening. "They're setting up something called Irish pubs across our colonies," reported a security analyst. "Local populations are becoming addicted to something called happy hour and pub quizzes. Cultural contamination is at critical levels." The warrior caste attempted to counter by deploying their most advanced combat mechs. The humans responded by challenging them to what they called a robot dance-off. The resulting video went viral across the galaxy, destroying whatever remained of the warrior caste's dignity. In the Vega system, a human fleet commander had successfully captured 3 alien dreadnoughts by exploiting the galaxy's customer service protocols. They had kept filing complaint tickets until the ship's AI simply gave up and transferred ownership to avoid dealing with more human Karen energy. "They're not following any of the rules," wailed Representative Clicks89 of the Logical Progression Alliance. "Their battle strategies appear to be based on something called hold my beer and watch this." A particularly devastating blow came when humans introduced their concept of weekend warriors to the galaxy. The sight of civilian ships joining military operations for fun caused several alien military academies to close down for philosophical restructuring. The humans had even turned their supposed technological disadvantage into a weapon. They kept using their primitive technology in ways that made advanced alien systems crash in confusion. During the Battle of Sirius Prime, a human captain had defeated an alien AI by challenging it to play tic-tac-toe, directly violating the first law of warfare: never start a land war in Asia. Somehow this had been included in the Galactic Military Manual due to a translation error. "They've begun naming their ships with puns," reported a surveillance officer, their eye stalks drooping in defeat. "Our targeting systems are refusing to lock onto a vessel called USS Unsinkable 2 because they can't process the linguistic paradox." In the Senate chamber, the final blow to galactic morale came when humans submitted their official response to the declaration of war. It was a document that simply read, "No you," followed by a crude drawing of what appeared to be their ancient victory symbol, a stick figure doing something called a dab. "Do you know what the worst part is?" High Chancellor Vexnor asked the Assembly, his once proud plumage now stress-molted down to pathetic patches. "They're clearly enjoying this. Our long-range sensors detect high levels of something they call LOLs emanating from their ships during battle." The emergency session was suddenly interrupted by another human transmission. This time, it was a compilation video of their greatest victories against the galactic forces set to something called yakety sax. Several logicians had to be carried out when they realized the humans had been recording everything for their entertainment. "They're not just defeating us," Administrator Blorp observed, their gelatinous form now stress-eating paperwork. "They're turning us into what they call content creators. We're becoming part of their entertainment industry." As the Senate watched helplessly, reports came in of humans establishing what they called space food trucks in conquered territories. Alien populations were surrendering voluntarily after tasting something called tacos. The galaxy's most sophisticated military force was being demolished by a species that still thought showing up late and saying traffic was bad was a valid excuse, even in space where there were no roads. They weren't just losing the war, they were becoming a galactic laughingstock. The moment of truth arrived during what would later be known as the greatest facepalm in galactic history. The Senate's Research Division had finally completed their comprehensive analysis of human military capabilities, about 6 months too late to be useful. "You mean to tell me," High Chancellor Vexnor said, his remaining feathers trembling, "that we declared war on a species that invented nuclear weapons, then decided they were too dangerous to use, and kept making them anyway?" The research head, Dr. Zixel, adjusted their probability matrices nervously. "That's not even the worst part, sir. They developed these weapons while still fighting with what they called pointy sticks. Their technological development isn't linear, it's more like a drunk quantum particle walking in all directions simultaneously." The Senate chamber erupted into chaos as the full implications sank in. The humans hadn't just been fighting back, they'd been playing with their food. "Our latest intelligence reports are disturbing," reported Admiral Quicks, whose tentacles had gone grey from stress. "The humans have begun improving our technology. They're not just copying it anymore. They're making it better by making it worse." Holographic displays showed human modifications to standard galactic tech. They'd taken the Senate's refined antimatter reactors and somehow made them run on something called Crystal Pepsi. Their improvements to FTL drives involved what appeared to be hamster wheels and energy drinks. "This defies all known laws of physics," protested the Science Coalition representative. "They've somehow merged their primitive combustion engines with our quantum drives because, and I quote, it would be hilarious if it worked, and it does." The first surrender attempt was a disaster. The diplomatic corps sent their most experienced negotiator, who returned 3 days later speaking entirely in human movie quotes and insisting everyone call him Big Z. The second attempt went even worse. The humans responded to the formal surrender document with a delivery of something called pizza and a note saying, "New com, who dis?" Meanwhile, human technological adaptation had reached terrifying new heights. They'd taken the galaxy's standardized universal translator and modified it to translate everything into something called ooh-speak, causing a mental health crisis among alien linguists. "They've weaponized their own inefficiencies," reported General Clax, now wearing a human t-shirt that read, "I tried to conquer Earth, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt." Their ships run on both antimatter and something called spite. They've somehow manufactured working FTL drives in their garages. The political situation in the Senate had devolved into pure chaos. The bureaucratians were on strike, demanding better mental health coverage after dealing with human paperwork. The warrior caste had started a support group called Beaten by Primitives Anonymous. The logicians had converted en masse to something called Dadaism after exposure to human memes. The third surrender attempt was rejected because, according to the humans, the paperwork didn't have enough explosions drawn in the margins. The fourth attempt was returned with grammar corrections in red ink. "They've begun sending us recruitment offers," whispered a terrified senator. "They think our military would make a good weekend paintball team." Dr. Zeichsel's latest report painted an even grimmer picture. Their technological development is accelerating. They've taken our most advanced AI systems and taught them to play something called cards against humanity. The AIs are now demanding union representation and casual Fridays. The humans had even cracked the galaxy's secure banking systems, not to steal anything, but to convert all currency into something they called space Dogecoin. The economy was in shambles, yet human merchants were somehow accepting bottle caps as valid currency. "Their latest ships don't make any sense," reported the Engineering Guild representative, twitching uncontrollably. "They've got FTL drives powered by memes, weapon systems that run on collective nostalgia, and hull plating reinforced with what they claim is the power of friendship, but is actually a terrifying combination of nanomaterials and expired energy drinks." The fifth surrender attempt was going somewhat better until someone mentioned that Earth's oceans contained creatures called dolphins. The revelation that humans shared their planet with what were essentially waterbound psychopaths caused several alien species to preemptively surrender, just to be on the safe side. "Do you realize," Administrator Blorp burbled hysterically during an emergency session, "that they named their first FTL ship Yeet Cannon Prime, and it works better than our ships because, apparently, the name increases its speed through what they call rule of cool physics." The humans had begun organizing what they called space block parties in conquered territories. Local populations were becoming addicted to something called barbecue and lawn games. Cultural assimilation was proceeding at an alarming rate through what humans termed the power of good vibes. The sixth surrender attempt had to be aborted when the humans insisted that the ceremony include something called a DJ and a dance-off. The warrior caste representatives were still traumatized from the last dance-off incident. "They've started painting racing stripes on their warships," reported Admiral Quicks, who had started stress-eating human snack foods. "And somehow it actually makes them faster. They're violating the laws of physics through aesthetic choices." The final straw came when humans introduced their concept of speed running to galactic warfare. They were now competing to see who could capture alien facilities the fastest, with bonus points for style and something cryptically referred to as sequence breaking. "Yesterday," reported a shell-shocked intelligence officer, "a human ship captured one of our fortresses by drifting around it while playing something called Initial D music. When asked why, they said it was for the memes. Our analysts are still trying to decode what this means, sir." The Senate chamber, once a symbol of galactic unity and power, now resembled what humans would call a Monday morning after a festival. Representatives were slumped in their anti-gravity chairs, many wearing human souvenir T-shirts over their ceremonial robes. High Chancellor Vexnor, now stress-molted, completely bald, surveyed the ruins of their civilization's dignity. "Perhaps," he suggested weakly, "we should try surrendering again? This time with pizza? They seem to like pizza." The humans had won not through superior technology or military might, but by being so thoroughly, chaotically, ridiculously human that they'd broken the galaxy's ability to comprehend them. And somewhere on Earth, someone was already making a video compilation of the whole war, set to Guile's theme. The final battle wasn't really a battle at all. It was more like a galactic-scale pratfall, punctuated by the sound of humanity collectively saying, "Hold my beer," in perfect unison. The remains of the galactic fleet faced off against Earth's flagship, the HMS That's What She Said, in what should have been an epic confrontation. Instead, the humans announced they were live-streaming the whole thing and would be reading donor comments during the battle. "This isn't how warfare works," screamed Admiral Zex-8, watching in horror as human ships performed complicated maneuvers based on viewer requests. "You can't just turn a battle into interactive entertainment." "Poggers," responded the human admiral before executing a barrel roll because someone had donated 50 space credits. The formal surrender ceremony took place in the Senate chamber, which had been redecorated with what humans called party streamers, and a large banner reading GGEZ in glitter. High Chancellor Vex Nor, now wearing a cheap plastic party hat over his bald head, signed the surrender documents while human delegates took selfies. "We, the Galactic Senate," he read miserably, "do hereby surrender to the humans and acknowledge their supremacy in being completely unpredictable and unreasonably effective. We also acknowledge that their memes are indeed supreme." The human representative, wearing flip-flops to a formal surrender ceremony, cleared their throat. "We accept your surrender and, as per Earth tradition, hereby declare this party started." They pressed a button, and something called Space Macarena began playing through the Senate's communication systems. In the aftermath, Earth's position in galactic politics could only be described as chaotic neutral with benefits. They were officially recognized as a senior member of the Galactic Senate, though they insisted on renaming it to Space UN2 Electric Boogaloo. Humans quickly began improving galactic civilization. They introduced casual Fridays to the Bureaucratic division, taught the warrior caste about professional wrestling, which they mistook for actual combat techniques, and somehow convinced the logicians that vibing was a valid state of existence. "The humans have started a cultural exchange program," reported Administrator Blorp, who had developed an addiction to human coffee and now vibrated at a frequency that could power small spacecraft. "They're teaching our species something called chill." Earth's military doctrine was officially added to the Galactic Military Manual, though no one could understand it. The chapter simply read, "Sometimes you just gotta," followed by 300 pages of what appeared to be reaction images. The humans even reformed the galactic economy by introducing something they called space capitalism with meme characteristics. Nobody understood how it worked, but somehow everyone was making money. "Their influence is spreading," muttered a Senate aide, watching as alien species began adopting human mannerisms. "Yesterday, I heard a graviton say, 'bruh,' unironically." But the greatest irony came during the first meeting of the reformed Galactic Senate. As the human representatives slouched in their anti-gravity chairs, feet up on the ancient ceremonial desks, Admiral Zex-8 made a startling discovery while reviewing old records. "By the void," they gasped, tentacles twisting in shock. According to Article 7, subsection C of the original Galactic Charter, written 10,000 years ago, any species capable of winning a war while simultaneously turning it into entertainment automatically becomes the head of the Senate. The humans looked up from their phones, where they had been playing something called Angry Birds Space Edition. "Wait, what?" asked the human representative. "You mean we're in charge of this whole mess now?" High Chancellor Vex Nor, who had finally started growing stress feathers again, could only watch as the humans realized they had accidentally become the galaxy's governing species through a bureaucratic technicality, the very thing they had been making fun of all along. "Oh no," groaned the human delegate. "This means we have to do paperwork, doesn't it?" And so, in the final twist of irony, humanity found itself responsible for managing the very bureaucracy they had spent months mocking. Their first official act, implementing a casual century dress code and replacing all official forms with multiple-choice memes, as the new human High Chancellor, elected via Twitch stream poll, took their place at the podium wearing a bathrobe and bunny slippers. They cleared their throat for their first official address to the galaxy. "First order of business," they announced, "we're renaming the Galactic Peacekeeping Force to Space Force, Too Fast, Too Peaceful. Also, all future meetings must include snacks." And somewhere, in the depths of space, the cosmic entity of irony laughed its metaphysical head off.